Selections from the Han Feizi by Han Fei or Han Feizi. Han Fei died in 233 BCE. He was a student of the philosopher Xunzi, who lived from 310 to 219 BC, and we'll read some works by Xunzi later. Han Fei abandoned Confucian philosophy in favor of the more pragmatic and hard-headed approach of men like Lord Shang, Yang, who died in 338 BC, whom we collectively label as legalist. Okay, this is the word ho-ka, Nihongo de ho-ka te kaite fa-jia in Chinese. Law, house is the word in Chinese, fa-jia, for legalist. So Han Fei and the Han Feizi is associated with legalism. Okay, it's a very important term, one of the 100 schools that competed in this period, and the legalist, the Fajia school, eventually came to dominate and served as the sort of foundation for the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty was the first sort of real unification of China in the 3rd century BC, I think, and it's a very short-lived period, but it's a very important period because it's the first time China really reunited into a single unit since the early Zhou period, and it's the origin of the word China to Qing. But at any rate, Han Fei is the sort of founder, one of the founding figures of the league, not the founder, but one of the important early figures in legalism. Han Fei worked as an official for the state of Qing until he was executed in 233. Okay, so this 233, he was executed allegedly on charges manipulated by a fellow official Li Si, who was also formerly a fellow student of Xunzi. So Xunzi produced these two students who competed, one killing the other. Okay, Xunzi was a Confucius, working in the Confucius tradition, but Han Fei broke away from him and came to reject Confucianism altogether, as we'll see in this reading I'm about to do. Han Fei is most famous for having developed a thorough and systematic synthesis of legalism, the Fajia school, and Taoism, the Dajiao, Dokyo, Daojiao philosophy. So he combines legalism and Taoism, which we see in the book that bears his name, the Han Feizi, a book of which he is possibly the real author, but which at any rate is accepted as a reasonably accurate representation of his thinking. Okay, and when Western philosophers and professors teach Han Feizi, they often compare him to the Western figures of Machiavelli and sometimes Thomas Hobbes as well. So keep Hobbes and Machiavelli in mind as we read this. Okay, so as always, this worksheet was compiled by somebody at Columbia University. I'll provide the link in the description below. And the worksheet is based on sources of Chinese tradition, compiled by William Theodore de Barry and Irene Bloom, Volume 1, published by Columbia University Press in 1999. I'll provide the link to that book below in the descriptions as well, so you can purchase that book. Okay. Now here are the selections from the Han Feizi, chapter 49, the infamous chapter, The 5 Vermin is the title of the chapter. As always, the worksheet includes an abridged version and then the longer version below. I'll read the longer version, but I'll start by reading the questions that we will discuss in class about this work. Question number 1. What is Han Fei's attitude toward the past? How does it compare to the attitude of the Confucian scholars? Okay, so whereas the Confucian scholars look to the past ideally as a sort of ideal model that we should borrow and revive in the present, how does that view of the past compare with Han Fei's attitude toward the past? Question number 2. What assumptions about human nature, xing, X-I-N-G, xing is the word for human nature, remember? Japanese say sei. Kokoro ben ni ao te kaite sei, or xing in Chinese. What assumptions about human nature, xing, underlie Han Fei's ideas about government and law? So what view of human nature does he have? Is it similar to Mencius's view, that all humans are good? Or is it closer to Xunzi's view, who says humans are notoriously evil and prone to bad things only without cultivation. Question number 3. Han Fei suggests that one cannot staff a bureaucracy by looking for wise and good men, or junza. What alternative does he suggest? Is his alternative realistic? Explain. Question number 4. Would you prefer to work in a government that is run according to Han Fei's ideas, or in a government run according to the ideas of Confucius? Okay, so as a bureaucrat or government official, would you rather work in Han Fei's government or Confucius's government? And then similarly, question 5, would you prefer to live in a state governed according to the principles of Confucius and Mencius, or one governed according to the principles of Han Fei, okay, as a citizen? Which world or realm, country, government would you prefer to live under as a citizen? Okay. And now the selections from the Feizi, chapter 49, the 5 vermin. There was a farmer. Okay, this passage is fairly long. It's 4 pages total. Okay, I'll read fairly fast without any commentary. There was a farmer of Shang who tilled the land, and in his field was a stump. Okay, this is the famous story about the rabbit hitting the stump, and there's a famous Yoji Jukugo about this 4-character sort of kotowaza expression in Chinese. I'll provide information about that in the description below. I forget what the exact kanji are, but it's a very famous story. There was a farmer of Song who tilled the land, and in his field was a stump. One day a rabbit, racing across the field, bumped into the stump, broke its neck, and died. Thereupon the farmer laid aside his plow and took up watch beside the stump, hoping that he would get another rabbit in the same way. But he got no more rabbits, and instead became the laughingstock of Song. Those who think they can take the way of the ancient kings and use them to govern the people of today all belong in the category of stump watchers. So immediately he's attacking the Confucianists, who say that we should take the ways of the ancient kings as our model. He's saying those ancient ways are too idealistic, that human reality doesn't conform to those ideals, and anybody who takes up those models will inevitably fail, is his point here. When Yao, this is the Yao of the ideal ruler of the distant past of the early Zhou, Yao and Shun leaders, you remember? And he's referring to them here, to Yao here. When Yao ruled the world, he left the thatch of his roof untrimmed, and the raw timber of his beams was left unplaned. He ate coarse millet in a soup of greens, wore deerskin in the winter days, and rough fiber robes in summer. Even a lowly gatekeeper was no worse clothed and provided for than he. When you ruled the world, he took plow and... When you ruled the world, okay, first it was about Yao, now it's about you. When you ruled the world, he took plow and spade in hand to lead his people, working until there was no more down on his thighs or hair on his shins. Even the toil of a slave taken prisoner in the wars was no bitterer than his. Therefore, those men in ancient times who abdicated and relinquished the rule of the world were, in a manner of speaking, merely forsaking the life of a gatekeeper and escaping from the toil of a slave. Therefore, they thought little of handing over the rule of the world to someone else. Nowadays, however, the magistrate of a district dies, and his sons and grandsons are able to go riding about in carriages for generations after. Therefore, people prize such offices. In the matter of relinquishing things, people thought nothing of stepping down from the position of son of heaven, the Tianzi, remember, in ancient times, the emperor, basically, the position of emperor, son of heaven in ancient times. Yet they are very reluctant to give up the post of district magistrate today. This is because of the difference in the actual benefits received. When men lightly relinquish the position of son of heaven, it is not because they are high-minded, but because the advantages of the post are slight. When men strive for sinecures in the government, it is not because they are base, but because the power they will acquire is great. When the sage rules, he takes into consideration the quantity of things and deliberates on scarcity and plenty. Though his punishments may be light, this is not due to his compassion. Though his penalties may be severe, this is not because he is cruel. He simply follows the custom appropriate to the time. Circumstances change according to the age, and ways of dealing with them change with the circumstances. Past and present have different customs. New and old adopt different measures. This is an important point he's making here. Underline this. The ways of the ways of the early Zhou kings that Confucius constantly extols are not our ways, and they shouldn't be forced upon our own times, is what he's saying here. To try to use the ways of a generous and lenient government to rule the people of a critical age is like trying to drive a runaway horse without using reins or whip. This is the misfortune that ignorance invites. Okay, so the Zhou kings were able to rule wisely and benevolently and kindly, and without having to force stiff rules and cruel punishment upon the people, because the people in those days were good, is what he's saying. And today, sadly, that is not the case, is his implicit point here. Now the Confucians and the Mohists all praise the ancient kings for their universal love of the world, saying that they looked after the people as parents look after a beloved child. And how do they prove this contention? They say, whenever the minister of justice administered some punishment, the ruler would purposely cancel all musical performances. And whenever the ruler learned that the death sentence had been passed on someone, he would shed tears. For this reason, they praised the ancient kings. Okay, so they praised the ancient kings for being compassionate and kind and benevolent. Now, if ruler and subject must become like father and son before there can be order, then we must suppose that there is no such thing as an unruly father or a son. Among human affections, none takes priority over the love of parents for the children. But though all parents may show love for the children are not always well behaved. And if such love cannot prevent children from becoming unruly, then how can it bring the people to order? Humaneness, or ren, may make one shed tears and be reluctant to apply penalties, but law makes it clear that such penalties must be applied. So ren is not sufficient, Han Fei is saying here. The ancient kings allowed law to be supreme and did not give in to their tearful longings. Hence it is obvious that humaneness, ren, cannot be used to achieve order in the state. So ren, humaneness, benevolence, is great and all, but it's not enough to keep a ruly and orderly society. Now here is a young man of bad character. His parents rail at him. So he's given an example of a young man with bad character. His parents rail at him, but he does not reform. The neighbors scold, but he is unmoved. His teachers instruct him, but he refuses to change his ways. Thus, although three fine influences are brought to bear on him, the love of his parents, filiality, the efforts of his neighbors, the wisdom of his teachers, yet he remains unmoved and refuses to change so much as a hair on his shin. But let the district magistrate send out the government soldiers to enforce the law and search for evildoers, and then he is filled with terror, reforms his conduct, and changes his ways. Okay, so those who will not be reformed, or who refuse to reform themselves, need to be filled with terror and the threat of punishment. Violent punishment, death, torture, and so forth is what he's referring to here. And then, once he faces that terror, he will reform his conduct and change his ways. Thus, the love of parents is not enough to make children learn what is right, but must be backed up by the strict penalties of the local officials. For people by nature grow proud on love, but they listen to authority. The best rewards are those that are generous and predictable, so that the people may profit by them. Okay, so in the above paragraph, he discussed punishments. Now he moves on to rewards. The best penalties are those that are severe and inescapable, so that the people will fear them. Okay, rewards and punishments. Rewards and punishments must be the two primary tools of the ruler and the government, is what he's saying here. The best laws are those that are uniform and inflexible, so that the people can understand them. Okay, so the best rewards, the best penalties, and the best laws are the three things he delineates in that paragraph. Best rewards are generous and predictable. Best penalties are severe and inescapable. and the best laws are uniform and inflexible. So this uniformity of the law is something that Confucius stressed, right? So there are some overlaps with the Confucius and with the followers of Confucius, despite the fact that Han Fei is sort of rebelling and turning away from the Confucianism of his early training, education. Continuing, those who practice ren, humaneness, and rightness, yi, should not be praised, for to praise them is to cast aspersion on military achievements. Men of literary accomplishments, right, the shi, should not be employed in the government, for to employ them is to bring confusion to the law. Okay, so keep the poets and the literati out of the government is what he's saying here. In the state of Chu, there was a man named Honest Gong. When his father stole a sheep, he reported the theft to the authorities. But the local magistrate, considering that the man was honest in the service of his sovereign, but a villain to his own father, replied, "Put him to death." And the man was accordingly sentenced and executed. Thus we see a man who is an honest subject of his. Thus we see that a man who is an honest subject of his sovereign may be an infamous son to his father. And he moves on to the next example. There was a man of Lu who accompanied his sovereign to war. 3 times he went into battle, and 3 times he ran away. When Confucius asked him the reason, he replied, "I have an aged father, and if I should die, there would be no one to take care of him." Confucius, considering the man filial, recommended him and had him promoted to a post in the government. Thus we see that a man who is a filial son to his father may be a traitorous subject to his lord. The Magistrate of Chu, so he moves on to the next example, Magistrate of Chu, and in class we can talk about the point that he is trying to make with each of these examples. The Magistrate of Chu executed a man, and as a result the felonies of the state were never reported to the authorities. Confucius rewarded the man, and as a result the people of Lu thought nothing of surrendering or running away in battle. Since the interests of superior and inferior are as disparate as all this, it is hopeless for the ruler to praise the actions of the private individual and at the same time to try to ensure blessing to the state's altars of the soil and grain. Next example he gives, in ancient times when Tang created the system of writing, he used the character for private. I think the character here is watashi, shi, watashi, private, to express the idea of self-centeredness. All right, so the character watashi, shi, in Chinese originally meant not I. In most cases, it meant private, with a negative connotation to self-centered. So this character, private, was originally used to express the idea of self-centeredness, and combined the elements. And he combined the elements for private and opposed to form the character for public. The fact that public and private are mutually opposed was already well understood at the time of Tang Jie. To regard the two as being identical in interest is a disaster that comes from lack of consideration. Okay, so I think he's accusing Confucius here of mixing the two, of conflating the private and the public, and not giving sufficient distinction between the two, and therefore coming up with an ethical system, a moral system that overemphasizes the private at the expense of the public, I think is what he's saying here. The world calls worthy those whose conduct is marked by integrity and good faith. And wise, the world calls wise those whose words are subtle and mysterious. But even the wisest man has difficulty understanding the words that are subtle and mysterious. Now, if you want to set up laws for the masses and you try to base them on doctrines that even the wisest men have difficulty in understanding, how can the common people comprehend them? Now, in administering your rule and dealing with the people, if you do not speak in terms that any man or woman can plainly understand, but long to apply the doctrines of the wise men, then you will defeat your own efforts at rule. Subtle and mysterious. All right, the kanji used for the subtle and mysterious is probably something like gen in Japanese, and myo gen or something along those lines. And he's saying that the words of Confucius are subtle and mysterious and profound in a philosophical sense, perhaps, but they are not applicable to matters of the state. All right, the people are not on their level, and the people need to be dealt with harshly and bluntly and using of simple, straightforward, and violent, if necessary, language. Our subtle and mysterious words are no business of the people. Next paragraph. If people regard those who act with integrity and good faith as worthy, it must be because they value men who have no deceit. And they value men of no deceit because they themselves have no means to protect themselves from deceit. The common people, in selecting their friends, for example, have no wealth by which to win others over, and no authority by which to intimidate others. For that reason, they seek for men who are without deceit to be their friends. But the ruler occupies a position whereby he may impose his will upon others, and he has the whole wealth of the nation at his disposal. He may dispense lavish rewards and severe penalties, and by wielding these two handles, may illuminate all things through his wise policies. In that case, even traitorous ministers like Chang and Zhang would not dare to deceive him. Why should he have to wait for men who are by nature not deceitful? Next paragraph. Hardly 10 men of true integrity and good faith can be found today, and yet the offices of the state number in the hundreds. If they must be filled by men of integrity and good faith, then there will never be enough men to go around. Okay, so virtuous men are hard to come by. They're a rarity. Therefore, the expectation or the hope of filling the government with wise or virtuous or trustworthy men is a pipe dream, and therefore we have no choice but to fill it with mediocre men, is what he's saying here. If they must be filled by men of integrity and good faith, then there will never be enough men to go around. And if the offices are left unfilled, then those whose business it is to govern will dwindle in numbers, while disorderly men increase. Therefore, the way of the enlightened ruler is to unify the laws instead of seeking for wise men. Okay, laws, not men. Unify the laws, and don't worry about. We don't have to worry about whether the government officials are wise and virtuous or not. Therefore, the way of the enlightened ruler is to unify the laws instead of seeking for wise men, to lay down firm policies instead of longing for men of good faith. So the institutions, the laws. Okay. There's a prominent Catholic law professor at Harvard now, Vermin, I think his name is, and he's often called the Han Fei of 21st century America, and I see some overlaps in their thinking. Therefore, the way of enlightened rulers to unify the laws instead of to lay down firm policies instead of longing for men of good faith. Hence, his laws, the wise ruler's laws, never fail him, and there is no felony or deceit among his officials, because if they commit a felony or deceit, they are severely punished, is what he means there. Next paragraph. Now the people of the state all discuss good government, and everyone has a copy of the works on law by Shang and Guanzhong in his house. And yet the state gets poorer and poorer, for though many people talk about farming, very few put their hands to a plow. The people of the state all discuss military affairs, and everyone has a copy of the works of Sun Wu and Wu Qi in his house, and yet the armies grow weaker and weaker. For though many people talk about war, few buckle on armor. Therefore, an enlightened ruler, here's the important part, whenever he starts a sentence with therefore an enlightened ruler, underline that sentence, therefore an enlightened ruler will make use of men's strength, but will not heed their words. He will reward their accomplishments, but will prohibit useless activities. Okay, he will make use of men's strength, but not heed their words. He will reward their accomplishments, but will prohibit useless activities. So this is an action-based society that rewards and punishes according to actions and rather than words. Then the people will be willing to exert themselves to the point of death in the service of their sovereign. Next paragraph, we have 2 or 3 more paragraphs to go. Farming requires a lot of hard work, but people will do it because they say, this way we can get rich. War is a dangerous undertaking, but people will take part in it because they say, This way we can become eminent. Okay, so the people are driven by rewards. Okay, this is very different than the deontological or virtue-based ethics of Confucius. This is what philosophers who work in ethics call a consequentialist view of ethics, right? Ethics are actions that are driven by the rewards that come through those actions. Okay, so Han Fei is very much a consequentialist, and he's arguing against the deontological position. This way we can become evidence. So they go to war, they're motivated to go to war because they will become eminent by doing so. They will work hard because they will be able to get rich, okay? Now if men who devote themselves to literature or study the art of persuasive speaking are able to get the fruits of wealth without the hard work of the farmer, and can gain the advantages of evidence without the danger of battle, then who will not take up such pursuits? So for every man who works with his hands, there will be 100 devoting themselves to the pursuit of wisdom. If those who pursue wisdom are numerous, the laws will be defeated. And if those who labor with their hands are few, the state will grow poor. Hence the age will become disordered. Okay, and it's often said that Mao Zedong was a great reader, a great fan of Han Fei, and I think he might have been influenced by this passage, this paragraph here, saying that people are drawn to intellectual pursuits because it's easy. There's no fear of death. You don't have to work hard. You just think about wisdom and philosophical abstract ideas and so forth. And when you have a system that is set up where people are motivated to move in that direction, in the direction of intellectual pursuits and philosophy and so forth, the whole state will collapse because everybody will start doing it. Nobody will do the necessary work of farming and of conducting military affairs and so forth. Hence the age will become disordered. So there's kind of an anti-intellectual strain to his writings. A good age, in Han Fei's view, is an age where there are very few intellectuals, especially in the government. Therefore, in the state of an enlightened ruler, there are no books written on bamboo slips. Okay, this anti-intellectual sentiment that runs throughout this work, of course, cultivated, crystallized in the burning of the books, right? The famous incident of the burning of the books. I'll put a link onto Wikipedia. I think there's a Wikipedia entry about the burning of the books incident that took place in this Qing dynasty, and it was inspired by the ideas set forth here by Han Fei. Okay, so Han Fei writes, therefore in the state of enlightened ruler, there are no books written on bamboo slips. Law supplies the only instruction. Okay, the only need for writing is law. He doesn't want poetry, doesn't want philosophical speculation, he wants law. There are no sermons on the former kings. So he's referring to Confucius here, who gives sermons on the former kings and how great and virtuous they were, and Confucius' followers. The officials serve as the only teachers. Okay, so no great idols of the past. The officials are the teachers. The living officials are the teachers for the age. In an age of an enlightened ruler, according to Han Fei, there are no fierce feuds or private swordsmen. Cutting off the heads of the enemy is the only deed of valor. Hence, and the enemies, referring not only to external enemies, but internal enemies as well. Hence, when the people of such a state make a speech, they say nothing that is in contradiction to the law. When they act, it is in some way that will bring useful results. And when they do brave deeds, they do them in the army. Therefore, in times of peace, the state is rich, and in times of trouble, its armies are strong. Okay, 2 more paragraphs. These are the customs of a disordered state. Now he lists the customs of a disordered state. Its scholars praise the ways of former kings and imitate their humaneness, their run, and their rightness, yi. The scholars put on a fair appearance and speak in elegant phrases, thus casting doubt upon the laws of the time and causing the ruler to be of 2 minds. Okay, so a degraded age, in his view, is a skeptical age, an age where philosophers and deep thinkers constantly analyze and criticize and critique all of the established norms. That's a degraded age in his view. Its speech makers, in a degraded age, propound false schemes and borrow influence from abroad, furthering their private interests and forgetting the welfare of the state's altars of the soil and grain. Its swordsmen, in a degraded age, gather bands of followers about them and perform deeds of honor, making a fine name for themselves and violating the prohibitions of the 5 government bureaus. Okay, and in a disordered age, those of its people who are worried about military service flock to the gates of private individuals and pour out their wealth in bribes to influential men who will plead for them, in this way escaping the hardship of battle. Okay, reminded of contemporary America, where the rich bribe their way out of having to serve in the military, for example. Its merchants and artisans, in a disordered age, spend their time making articles of no practical use and gathering stores of luxury goods, accumulating riches, waiting for the best time to sell, and exploiting the farmers. Okay, so Han Fei is, in many ways, turns his back against Confucius, but he still extols the farmers, who are theoretically at the top of the Confucian hierarchy of social classes, right? The shi no ko sho, as we say in Japanese. The shi is the samurai class at the top, or the warrior class at the top. After that is the farmers. So he's still adhering to this hierarchy, the standard Confucian hierarchy, where the farmers rank at the second place from the top in the social hierarchy. These 5 groups are the vermin of the state. Okay, thus the title for this chapter, The Vermin of the State. These 5 groups are the vermin of the state. If the rulers do not wipe out such vermin, and in their place encourage men of integrity and public spirit, then they should not be surprised when they look about the area within the 4 seas to see states perish and ruling houses wane and die. And just to review, the 5 groups that are the vermin of the state in his view are the 5 groups that he delineates in that penultimate paragraph, right? The scholars, the speech makers, the swordsmen, and the merchants and the artisans. Those 5 groups, when they have risen to prominence within the realm, then you know that your state is in trouble, is what he is saying here. All right, that's all for the lesson on Han Fei and his Han Feizi. We'll discuss the study questions in class and delve a little bit more deeply into this text. That is all for now. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.